So many people talk to me about new ideas, new visions that they have. And sometimes they did start on that journey, but there was a setback. And then they say, but Retah, did I hear God's voice? Was it God's idea for me to do this? And this is what I want to talk to you about today. You can have God's idea, or you can have a good idea. Well, even in God's ideas, everything isn't always perfect, but it's still God's idea. And that's why you will find God in that. And that's what we want. So the difference is that the good idea comes from ourselves, our own mind, our human being, but God's ideas comes from the Creator himself. God, he's the Father who wants us to dream with him. He's the dream giver. So good ideas might come to pass as we work on them and, put our best into them. But God's ideas is something different. It comes to pass when we do things God's way, when we obey him, when we walk on the water and we wait for God to give us wisdom every time. So when we depend on good ideas, our own strategies, we're depending on human wisdom, human knowledge, I want to say, and human strength. And this is why people want to give up, because it's your own strength and not God's strength. Now, I read in the book of Acts where the story about Paul and his partner Silas in the book of Acts 16. So Paul had this idea, and him and Silas were talking, and they had this idea, maybe we should go and preach in Asia. But God said, that's a good idea, but it's not my idea. And they were blocked. And then they continue in their own wisdom, but they were blocked. And what's the difference? You can do something in your own wisdom and your own understanding, but you're not going to carry the supernatural power, favor of God. The favor of God and the favor of man. You're not going to carry that. And this is what we need. So what happened is Paul and Silas know that if they did go on with a good idea, they would proceed in their own wisdom, but there will not be the power. But they wanted it, God's supernatural power and wisdom to watch over them. I go where you go. And when Moses said, I'm not going to go without you. So it wasn't long before Paul had a vision. And when he was praying, okay, God, if this is not your will, what's your will? God gave him a vision of a man calling them to come to Macedonia. And immediately he knew it was God's idea. So they went out to set out for Philippi, and it's the foremost city in Macedonia. So after being there for a couple of days, ministering there, they met a woman named Lydia. You all know the story of her. She was a merchant, very wealthy woman. She brought them in her home, and she opened up her home. They ministered there, and she accepted Christ, and many people come to Christ, and they got baptized, and Jesus changed many people's lives there. So there was a huge outbreak of the power of God. And so Paul and Silas walked about in the city, and then this happened to them. Beautiful revival in God's will, but the servant girl kept harassing them in a strange way. She was crying out that Paul and Silas were servants of the Most High God, telling them beautiful things about them, putting honey on their mouths. And so they realized, hey, she's drawing attention to us and not to God. You know how quickly that can happen? Where you become the idol, where people put their eyes on you and not on God. Do you know that's idol worshiping? So dangerous when we don't turn people's eyes towards Jesus, but turn them to us, ourselves. So Paul just smelled a rat, and he was like, no, things not good here. The people's eyes are on me. And he says no. So eventually there was a demon involved there. He saw the demon, wisdom from God, chased the demon out. And then the next day, it was havoc in Paul and Silas' lives. Why? That demon was a fortune teller. And that demon, they made a lot of money out of that demon. So the people came to Paul and Silas, and they were angry because what happened? Because now the girl couldn't operate anymore, but she was saved and she was free. God's idea when Paul and Silas went to Philippi were backed by God's wisdom, by His supernatural power, by bringing freedom, by bringing Jesus in. So, you know, unfortunately, the enemy doesn't like that. And so this unexpected turn that came into their life, one day it was still wonderful, everything went well. The second day, it was just havoc and setbacks, and everybody was against them. And they had to stop. Somebody could say to them, why did you come here? Was it a good idea or God idea? It cannot be a God idea, because look, everybody fights and it's havoc and they wanted to kill them. Somebody wants to kill you, you would think, is it my way or was it God's way? And this is where I think sometimes we miss it, where we think if it's God's way, everything's just perfect. Everything is just going to be perfect, perfect, perfect. You know, God's going to send you into situations where He's going to use you as a diamond to break open ground, as a breaking anointing. God's going to use you in your family to bring in the truth. They're not all going to laugh at you and applaud you. No, no, no. Why? Those demons in them is going to hate you for bringing the truth. Because why are you breaking up what we live for all these years? Is this a God idea or a good idea? You see, God are accompanied with truth, with life, with supernatural power. And yes, I mean, in love, because God is love. You know, they stood because they knew this is not my mother that sent me. It's not my husband that sent me. It's God that sent me. It's God that's backing me. It's God that drove those demons out. It's God that won that girl set free. So this is what we should always know, that the enemy would come against us when we do God's way. Just because we're following God's plan and purpose, our lives won't be just perfect. The truth is, sometimes the battles become more intense and more fiercely. But God, you know, He's always there for us, and He's never going to leave us nor forsake us. It's kind of a beautiful peace that you experience when you know that even though everything is not perfect around you, I'm in God's plan. I'm in His will for my life. And there's a supernatural peace that comes. And He bless you with skill. He bless you with ability. He bless you with favor of God, favor of man. And you know, Lydia opened her house, and she was a wealthy woman, and she looked after them. And this is where you know, when God looks after you, even through people, you know you're on God's path. Just continue doing what you need to do. Never, never draw their attention to you. Make sure we take people's hands and we take them to Jesus. We need all to keep our eyes on Jesus. My friend, I bless you. May you have a wonderful weekend and just enjoy God's will for your life. And if you're not sure about something, pray and allow God to take you places. Even if you by yourself would never choose that, God knows what He's doing. I bless you with that. God's will, we speak again.